Just one sec. Let me do this real quick. I got to get to the. Okay, there we go. Okay.
Okay, so participants, we're in the middle. Here they come.
Okay. Hi. Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
So I'm Brianna Yoakum.
Yeah. And honestly,
Let's make sure we mute people. Can everyone just have themselves muted right now, just so we can get started? Thank you. Okay. Good morning, you guys. So I'm Brianna Yoakum. I'm the accreditation coordinator for WAQRR, for Washington Alliance for Quality Recovery Residences. I just want to thank you guys so much for joining WAQRR in our conversation today as we explore how to walk with residents through conflict. I personally feel like this is such an important topic. I mean, as we know, managing a recovery residence has so many rewarding aspects, like seeing people grow through recovery, but along with that, there are days where conflict comes up. And so learning how we can take a deeper look at this topic and just the different ways we can help residents through it, I feel like is really important. So just for a little bit of housekeeping,
Where's my volume?
We had quite a bit of people register for this event. So if we can use the raise hand feature, that would be great. And then I will just get to your questions. If you want to ask questions in the chat, I'll be monitoring that as well. But yeah, if you want to raise your hand, we can call on you. And Alan Muia is going to be leading our discussion today. And so we're so lucky to have him. Alan Muia is the executive director of New Earth Recovery, a nonprofit that operates 5 different recovery homes for men and women in Skagit County, Washington. He's a founding member and serves as the chairperson of the Washington Alliance for Quality Recovery Residences. And before starting New Earth Recovery with his wife, Amy, Alan worked 18 years in higher education in residence life at Seattle Pacific University and as Dean of Student Services at Skagit Valley College. He is a trained relapse prevention coach and a mediator with the Regional Dispute Resolution Center. He holds a master's degree in educational psychology. And anyone who's had a chance to know Alan knows that he puts very high importance on conflict resolution in the recovery process. He knows that proper handling of conflict in recovery can greatly aid in a person's life in recovery. And with that, Alan, you can start us off.
Great. Well, thank you, Brianna. It's good to be with you. It's good to be with all of you. And again, really, really thankful for the opportunity to talk about this topic. I'm really geeky about this topic. I think it's one of the most important things. I tell people I really love conflict, and mostly I love other people's conflict. My own is uncomfortable and difficult, just like everybody else's. But how we navigate that feels really important to me, especially in the context of recovery. So again, as Brianna said, if you have questions, comments along the way, would love for you to just put those in the chat. If you want to say something out loud, just raise your hand, and Brianna has my permission, of course, to interrupt anytime she wants, and we'll make sure that we get those handled. And then, of course, we'll leave some time at the end for just general conversation. So as always, I think I've got some things that I want to say, but I also feel like some of the best conversation comes out when we're talking about what you want to talk about. So looking forward to doing that with you. So why is this topic important in recovery residences? Conflict is a part of all of our lives, and so how we deal with conflict is important for all of us. It's important in our relationships of all kinds, but specifically in our field of working with residents and people in recovery from substance use disorders and mental health disorders. This topic is really, really important. So I just want to give you my little laundry list. There's more to say, but But I think first of all, we know this little mantra that we use a lot in our world is that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. And there's a lot that we can say about that, but essentially, really believe that the quality and the quantity of the relationships that we have with other people kind of build the scaffolding that help people recover. And so you can kind of look at a person's overall health, mental health and recovery, and measure that in part by the quality of relationships they have with other people. Recovery residences are just this ideal environment where people can learn how to do this. We talk about how the best way is to empty the dishwasher, and whose job it's going to be to mow the lawn, and how neat is neat, and how clean is clean enough, and what's noisy and what's not. And there's just all these opportunities, right? All these great opportunities for conflict. And we actually have a policy at our little organization that when people first move into our residence, we don't let them move into a house into a single room. We want them to have a roommate, because roommate experience is absolutely critical for the recovery process. So that's a little bit radical, and we're upfront about that. We tell people that they're going to have a roommate when they come in. It's just part of how we do business. But residents are at a much higher risk of returning to use if they don't navigate conflict well. If you talk to people about what is it that, who've had a return to use or relapse, what is it that led up to that? And almost always you're going to hear something went wrong in a relationship of some kind, whether it was with a child or a parent or a significant other or something, or something just went awry. I wasn't able, a work relationship, something triggered that, and it almost always has to do with the relationship. So if we're talking about relapse prevention, if we're talking about keeping people in recovery, then we've got to deal with how they do relationships, and conflict, of course, is central to that. Conflict competence is really important in our staff. So if you're operating a recovery residence that is staffed, one of the best things, the best ways that you can train your folks in working with people is to help them coach residents through conflict. And so because it's so central, I've known of operators, recovery residence providers who essentially have chosen to kind of ignore conflicts in their homes and let the residents work it out, because that's how they've got to grow. And while I can appreciate the letting people have autonomy in their recovery, I think this is one area in which being able to coach somebody well and help them learn from that experience feels really, really important. A psychologist who I really admire says that we can have an experience and miss the meaning. And I think that in conflict, that's especially true. We can go through something really difficult and not learn a thing from it. And so, but if we can sort of walk alongside people in these situations, there's something that they can gain that will be absolutely useful to them in their next area, whatever that is, whether that's a marriage relationship or a work relationship or just other housing situations, any kind of relationship, conflict is going to happen. So this is a little bit of a rhetorical question, but the central currency of all of our relationships, and I want to read something from Stephen M.R. Covey, has something to say about this, and it's in the introduction to his book, which I'll tell you about in a second. There's one thing that is common to every relationship, individual, team, family, organization, nation, economy, and civilization throughout the world, which, if removed, will destroy the most powerful government, the most successful business, the most thriving economy, the most influential leadership, the greatest friendship, and the strongest character, the deepest love. On the other hand, if developed, this one thing has the potential to create unparalleled success and prosperity in every dimension of life. Yet it is the least understood, the most neglected, and the most underestimated possibility of our time. That's what Stephen M.R. Covey has to say about trust. And trust is, that's the end of the quote there. But trust is really the central kind of dynamic of our relationships with each other. So when we talk about, we're wired for trust. When we talk about how we relate to each other, or whether we're getting along with somebody, or even a level of intimacy that we have with somebody. What we're really talking about is the level at which we are able to trust that person, or at which we're able to trust each other. So we're wired for trust. We have in each of us what I think of as a trust meter. You know, the trust meter is always asking the question: do I trust somebody at a deeper level, or do I need to pull back and protect myself from that person? So even the most casual interactions, you know, at the grocery store or wherever you run into people, our trust meter is always going off. And I don't know if you've ever had maybe the briefest conversation with somebody in a casual kind of context like that, a real passing kind of thing, and there's something in you that says, wow, I'd like to get to know that person at a deeper level. And I'm not talking about, you know, sexual attraction or anything, just even a person that you wouldn't be attracted to in that way, but that you just have a sense that, wow, that's a person I really feel like is safe and I can trust. Your trust meter just feels relaxed and in good, in that they're in good company. The other reaction is also true. Have you ever been in a casual situation where you encounter somebody who you don't know, and your trust meter goes off and says, boy, that is a person that I need to really back off from and protect myself from? We're just wired to always be asking that question. And so that level of trust that we feel with somebody, even in the most casual interaction, it guides our emotions and guides our behaviors around them. So it helps us determine who we're in relationship with. It helps us determine where we want to work. If you read the literature around employment, money is not the most important thing to people who are, it is important. It's in the top 5, but the relationships that they have at their workplace is the thing that guides most of our decisions, or the number one factor in guiding most of our decisions about work and where we are. Trust has everything to do with what we're going to put up with in our relationships at home and at work. And if you think about it, recovery itself is the process of navigating trust, right? It's the process of regaining trust in our relationships, or maybe some of us have never had them before, but is navigating this sort of river of trust. And real recovery is actually learning to trust again. Because so often a breakdown in trust, even at a really, really early age, has had everything to do with somebody's pattern of use. And so that's a whole other topic we can get into, but long story short, one of the most difficult things to do in kind of navigating re-entry into recovery and stepping into life and healthy relationship is dealing with trust and how we do that. So this all may be true, but we've learned from our residents that trusting people is hard, and part of that is because not everyone is as trustworthy, and that's a really worthwhile thing to say. That again, if recovery is learning to trust again, the call isn't just to trust blindly or to trust without reservation. That really is dangerous, right? We would call that codependency or just having a lack of boundaries. So we're not talking about that. So in this sort of skill building that we have to do around trust is we've got to do that smartly and really thoughtfully. So I want to talk about then as we lead into the topic today, what are those things that we can do to build trust in our relationships? And you kind of get where I'm going, but so it won't be a surprise. But I'm just gonna sort of lay out a few kind of ground. I'm gonna sort of break the ground a little bit with some other kind of concepts, and then we'll start talking about conflict. But first of all, to build trust with people, we've got to do what we say we're going to do. If I've made a commitment of some kind, if I'm trustworthy, I'm going to keep that commitment. To be honest, which is similar to that, but it's honesty is about even saying the hard thing when there's pressure for all kinds of reasons not to. To right wrong. So when I've made a mistake, I actually really try to make amends and do something to right the wrong, so that I can rebuild a trust that I've broken. Do good work. This is so important for all of us who are whatever profession or work that we're in, or whether we're volunteering, to build trust in relationships. We've got to do good work. Whatever we were hired or committed to do, we commit to do that well. We listen first to other people. Pardon me, I've got to move my screen around a little bit here. So listen first instead of trying to be heard. So I don't know about you, but if you've ever talked to somebody who's a really good listener, that really is a trust building thing. You can just relax. And when you're not trying to think of the next thing you want to say in a conversation, and you're really trying to tune into somebody else, it drastically changes the level of trust that's being built in the conversation. Extend trust to others. Boy, how important is that this is a two-way street. And if I'm going to be trustworthy, I've got to extend it to somebody else. And it's going to be difficult for someone to trust me if they don't sense that I've extended that same courtesy to them. Keep confidences. So this applies in all areas of life, but if somebody asks us to not divulge something, or there's an implied sense that we shouldn't be talking about something, that we really take that seriously. Be vulnerable. We're going to talk a little bit about vulnerability a little bit later, but there is just a concrete connection between our own willingness to be vulnerable and how trustworthy people perceive us to be. In other words, if I can bring my real self to the table and risk doing that, and there is a risk to doing that, but if I can bring my real self to the table in a smart way, then that can really build trust in other people. And then finally, how we're going to spend most of our time here, the rest of the session, is to do conflict well. There really is no greater kind of impactful thing that we can do in our relationships with each other than to manage that trust dynamic when things are difficult, or when the conversation is crucial or important, or when we disagree about something. So there's this sort of dynamic that when we're kind of walking along, our trust meters are always active, like we said before. But when we run into a conflict or a disagreement with somebody, like, our trust meter just becomes all the more sensitive. And it's asking the question, do I need to protect myself because something dangerous is about to happen? Or do I need to, or can I take a risk and step into this and feel like everything is going to be okay? And if I do take that risk, and if it goes well, the potential for that relationship to go deeper really increases. And so, and I don't know about the rest of you, but when I look back at my relationships, the deepest relationships I have are with the people with whom I've navigated conflicts, and we've come out the other side and things have gotten better instead of worse. And so that really is kind of the balance of what we want to talk about today, is how do we get there? How do we get to when we're in relationships with people, get to a place where the conflict has actually aided us in our connection with somebody else, instead of made things worse, or worse still, ended the relationship. So I want to talk about that dynamic a little bit. And I want to give you some kind of big ideas. Here's the diagram. You always have to have a diagram to illustrate a point, but we have relationships with people, and then there's this sort of conflict dynamic in the middle. And if we do things right, we can get to real trust. So I want to just sort of float a few kind of big ideas that sort of support what we're talking about today. First of all, as we've already said, I strongly believe that trust is the basic ingredient in all of our relationships. So even in our most intimate relationships, intimacy and trust are in my mind fairly synonymous. They kind of mean the same thing. So every interaction with another person, no matter how sort of insignificant that interaction is, results in an increase or a decrease in our trust, because our trust meters are always going off. And so our relationships aren't static. They may feel like it because maybe that shift is just slight, but even how we greet somebody in the morning, or how we're so sensitive to each other, even again our most sort of intimate, sort of solid relationships, that trust meter is still asking the question, do I need to, can I really trust, or do I need to back off and protect myself? And so every interaction has an impact. So relationship then without conflict isn't an honest, growing relationship. And this is a bit controversial. So I talk to people sometimes, couples especially, who say, well, we just don't fight. And so I'm not necessarily talking about fighting, but my question would be, do you disagree? Do you agree about everything? A friend of mine quoted somebody, and I wish I knew who the quote came from, but if two people agree about everything, one of them is unnecessary. You know, that in our relationships we grow by our disagreements. When we disagree with somebody, or they rub against us the wrong way, or we run into something where we don't see eye to eye, there's an opportunity there for us to grow. And when I run into somebody who sees the world differently than I do, that interaction has the opportunity to make for a richer relationship, and that is really fantastic when you run into that and it works well. So if you have an honest relationship with somebody, you kind of over time, those layers of trust and intimacy kind of get kind of peeled back. We go deeper and deeper in relationship, which means that we're going to get to some areas in which we don't agree about something, or in which we collide, or our values don't line up. And so what we do with those is what's really going to matter. So the next point then is that no relationship is going to grow in trust or intimacy without the successful navigation of conflict. We can't, we have choices when we run into conflict, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But when we hit that choice, what we do with that is going to have everything to do with the state of the relationship afterward. And so how we handle that conflict is going to determine whether the relationship is going to go deeper and get better, or whether it's going to end, or whether we're going to be able to just sort of fake it and sort of stay stagnant where we are. And in which case, generally speaking, the relationship isn't going to grow. So again, I want to be really clear that we're not talking here just about intimate romantic relationships, or this applies to work relationships. It applies to certainly home relationships of all kinds, volunteer connections, anywhere where we are. These principles apply to us. So like all important topics, when we're talking about helping other people, the best place to start is understanding ourselves. And so my hope is, along the way, as we talk about these things, maybe, the first kind of reaction that most of us have is to say, well, I know somebody like that. I know somebody who deals with conflict in this way. But I want to invite you alongside that to actually also be thinking about what your own kind of natural inclinations are. So what are you more likely to do? What's your conflict style? So we want to talk about conflict styles in a real basic way. And for a lot of you, this won't be new material, but again, it's sort of foundational to kind of help us understand then how we help ourselves and how we help those we walk alongside navigate conflict and be able to get to good places. So we want to talk about conflict styles a little bit. And the first one is what we call aggression. And by the way, this is there are more kind of detailed versions. There are longer lists of conflict styles. I'm gonna talk about 3 conflict styles that are pretty natural to most of us, and then another one that really works. So most of us aren't born with conflict resolution skills. We've got to practice them, and most of us are born, or at least learn along the way, a style that serves us, but may not serve us at the very best. So anyway, that's the setup to the slide here. But the first style I want to talk about is just aggression. And so fairly self-explanatory here. Aggression is using anger as a tool. It's the goal of the aggressive style is to win. In order to gain control, or in order to gain control in order to win. So there's something here about needing to kind of beat the other person, or win an argument, or win the day, or however you want to articulate that. But the goal is to sort of come out on top. And a person who has an aggressive style and kind of gives into that style is, generally speaking, going to overwhelm, going to use whatever tactic, again, in the extreme, going to use whatever tactic necessary in order to get what they want to happen to happen. So the challenge with aggression, of course, is that in its raw form, when it's out of balance, it's really disrespectful of another person. And so if I'm gonna, if I'm an aggressive person and that's sort of not in check, that aggression tends to, as an aggressive person, I tend to see you as a person who's in the way of what I need to have happen. And so you become kind of an object or an obstacle to what I want to see in the world. And so I'm going to do what I need to do in order to win. So this is a style. If you tend toward aggression, that doesn't mean you're going to do it every time. Hopefully you don't. But there might be that voice inside, that internal voice that says, hey, you got to get control here. You got to win in order to make something, in order to be okay. And it's a very kind of limbic thing. It sort of can happen in our kind of lizard brain, way down deep in our brain. The message might be something like, hey, in order to survive, I need to win, right? And so those messages are really deep, as they are for the other conflict styles. So that's a little bit about aggression. Let me stop there for a second. Any other kind of comments, feedback about that particular style, or anything, any sort of observations you have about aggression before we dive into the kind of the opposite way of being? And Bree will call on you if you've got something to say, or if you want to write something, she'll read it. All right. Go ahead.
Bailey, did you have a question or a comment?
All right. If not, I'll keep plugging away, and feel free to jot something or interrupt again, Bree, if you want. So the opposite of aggression is obviously what we'll call passivity, right? So being passive looks like the very opposite. So instead of needing to win, somebody who is naturally passive, or if we're giving into a passive kind of style, the goal is really, instead of winning or control, the goal is often comfort. So I'm uncomfortable with the conflict, and I'm so uncomfortable with the conflict that I'm willing to lose, or I'm willing to or to deny that the conflict exists, or I'm willing to avoid or go out of the way to avoid it. So people who are passive would tend to say, hey, I'm not going to go there. They'll say, well, it's just not worth it. The challenge is I'm just not going to bring my real self or my perspective to the table, because it's just going to make waves, and I don't want to do that. In other words, I don't want to sort of pay the price of sort of stepping out and saying what I really think about something. It's not worth it. I'd rather lose so that I can be comfortable. So those of us who tend to be more passive, we just want to be friends again. We just want it to be okay. So there are other reasons to be passive as well, of course. In all of these styles, there's a place. There's a place to be a little more aggressive. There is a place to be passive. We talk about picking our battles, right? In other words, there are times, there are fights that aren't worth fighting. There are, if we're going to go to Burger King or McDonald's, it just doesn't matter all that much how that goes to me. So if the person I'm with wants to go to one or the other, it's just not, it's okay. So we're not talking here about picking our battles. We're talking about a conflict style that when it's at its worst, causes me to be really dishonest about what I am. So I don't bring to the table what I really think in conversations, because I naturally just want to avoid, not make a scene. And so my desire for comfort kind of overwhelms my desire to be heard or to be authentic. So the problem with passivity then, it can be very respectful, unlike aggression, but it sometimes can be dishonest. So I don't bring my real perspective to bear, because I feel like it just makes me so uncomfortable to do that. So in my lizard brain, instead of saying I need to win, it's saying I just need to get back to something that feels okay and that feels comfortable. So those are two kind of antithetical conflict styles. The third one is a little bit more complex, but again, maybe even more destructive than the others, and that is what we call passive aggression. So passive aggression is, you sort of see the little graphic here is a little bit two-faced. So passive aggression is sort of the worst of both worlds. It is both dishonest and disrespectful. So passive aggressive approach, instead of using anger to get what I want, I use disengagement. So what that looks like is me maybe at the heat of a conversation, right where we might be able to resolve something, it's not going my way. So instead I back off altogether and I say something like, well, whatever, or oh yeah, we'll do what you want to do. That's fine. I've backed off, I've given up, but it's not in the spirit of compromise, it's in the spirit of control. So I'm going to control this conversation right now in order to get what I want in the bigger picture or to get what I want later. Other passive aggressive kind of behavior is sarcasm. So if I am sarcastic, I can say something in a kind of a funny, joking sort of way that has a bite to it. So you can't really blame me for saying the thing because it was just a joke, but yet it was an extremely aggressive thing to say. So it's passive on the surface, but underneath it's very aggressive. So passive aggression, whether we're passive or aggressive, is a natural conflict style. Most of us know how to do passive aggression, and we can do it in really kind of overt ways like sarcasm, or we can do it really, really subtly. Maybe we're just a little bit quieter with our spouse or partner, significant other, our best friend than we normally would be. And so they say, well, what's wrong? We say, oh, nothing. But they know and we know there's something under the surface. So we can punish each other passive aggressively in a way that is neither honest nor respectful and is just really, really toxic. And so that's a style, again, that most of us can do pretty well. We've practiced it in our lives and have some experience doing that. So there's a lot could be said about all three of these, but I guess I'd be just open to any kind of observations that you all have, or just questions or comments just about conflict styles before we talk about the kind of the more healthy way of interacting. Any feedback on any of those?
I see a comment from Peggy, and she said, my son is an aggressor, and she said that she's battled with him his whole life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a hard one, aggression. And I imagine that you've probably learned some strategies around how to do that well. And some of those strategies, we talk about anger, which is sort of the tool of the aggressor, as almost always being a secondary emotion, meaning that it's not its own thing. It usually comes from something like fear of not having control, losing control, or shame. Shame is a really common kind of button that will set somebody off in an angry way. But some people have just kind of learned that anger works. They get what they want with anger. The conflict research tells us that about 80% of us lean towards passivity. So only 20% of us lean toward aggression, which means that 80% of the time, if I use my aggressive conflict style, I'm going to win. So only 20% of the people are going to resist me. And so that's just worth thinking about, that it's a strategy that people have learned and it works, but it usually is born out of something else. And really, really a helpful kind of frame. Anyway, it is a real challenge to walk alongside somebody for whom that's their kind of natural just way of being, and it's worked for them, or they wouldn't keep doing it, right?
So I don't see any more hands, but there's a couple more comments.
Sure, read them. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Great.
Sheena says, Al-Anon, we are powerless over our spouse's addictions as well. And that's what she has learned. Amy says, much of the time, I think I am more passive aggressive with coworkers that are aggressive so I can move forward. She said she uses sarcasm a lot. And then Peggy agrees that she becomes passive aggressive in those situations. And then what do you do when your boss is passive aggressive? There's a question.
Yeah, that's great. I want I'll answer that briefly here, but then hopefully we can get to it a little bit in our strategies later. What I tend to do with all of these is, when somebody is acting in any of these ways, is try to model something different. So a passive aggression might look like sarcasm, let's say. And so when someone makes a sarcastic comment, a question that I might ask is, oh, is there something we need to talk about? is there, or have I offended you in some way, or or do I do that, or what do you mean? And I do it in a way that's not that doesn't answer like for like. I try not to do that sarcastically back. I try not to be aggressive back, but to try to be assertive, which is the style we're going to talk about next, and just I call it naming the vibe. Right? There's something going on here in the room that I need to just say something about, and I need to ask in as a respectful, honest way as I can. What's going on here, and can we actually have the conversation that you're hinting at with that passive aggression, and hopefully invite them into actually being more honest and more respectful, so that we can actually move into something that's productive. Anything else, Bree?
Yeah. So there's one more comment here from Christina. She said, what would you recommend in communicating without appearing passive aggressive when you believe that a point that is intended to be poignant is not being received?
Yeah. So I guess I would try it again with different words, or I would, timing is everything in conflict. So there are times when someone is just not going to be receptive to what I have to say. And so I need to be able to say, I need to look for opportunities to bring it up at a time maybe that's less stressful, or where we have the time to expand the conversation to what it needs to be. When somebody is feeling unsafe, they're not going to engage in that conversation. So timing is everything. So looking for the right time to have the conversation. Right in the moment isn't always the right time. So if someone's not willing to listen in a situation to a good point that I'm making, how do I sort of, I use the language of a bookmark. How can I put a bookmark in the conversation and say, boy, I'd like to talk about this more at some point. This might not be the best time to do that, but could we pick this up here at a better time? And then, which gives me time to kind of rethink about how I can word something differently in a way that's going to be helpful. It gives the other person time to kind of think about their perspective a little bit, and maybe even rethink it. We come back to the table in a little bit more kind of planned way, and where maybe we're in a better space. I think about really practical things, like being sure that this sounds really basic, but being sure that everyone is hydrated and has food in their stomach, right? So anything we can do about hungry, angry, lonely, tired, anything we can do about those dynamics to kind of resolve those before we sit down and have a crucial conversation feels really, really important. I'm not sure that I got to your question. It was a good question. I tried to throw at you what I could, but all right, we'll have time for more of those sort of situational kinds of questions along the way. But let's dive into what assertiveness is then. So this word gets used in different contexts. I want to use it as a way to describe a healthy conflict style. So when I think about assertiveness, it is the best of conflict style as opposed to the worst. So passive aggression is kind of like the worst of all conflict styles. It's the worst of those things. So first of all, when I talk about being assertive, I want to be the opposite of the other three styles. So I want to be honest. I want to bring what's real to the table, how I'm really feeling about something, the impact that somebody has on me. I want to be respectful. So I want to be really aware of where the other person is, and I want to avoid hitting buttons that I know are going to be hard buttons. I want to avoid insults. I want to avoid anything that is going to be disrespectful of the person who is in front of me. And of course, I want to be engaged. So the opposite of passive aggression, where we sort of back off at just the right moment in order to keep control, is to stay engaged. And engagement, by the way, doesn't mean that, again, that I want to deal with it right now all the time. Timing is really important, but an engaging thing to say might be to another person. I'm going to use you, Brianna, because you're my friend. So Bree, this conversation is really important to me. I don't think this is the best time for us to do it, because I know I'm not at my best right now. Could we pick up in an hour after we get something to eat, or could we get back together tomorrow morning and really have some focused time to talk about this? So I'm saying, hey, this isn't the best time. I'm not walking off, which is the walk off is kind of a typical kind of a passive aggressive move, but being engaged means to say, this is important to me. It's so important that I really want to do it right. Can we do it at a time that we're going to have the most opportunity to succeed, right? So that's engagement. I want to just ask you to type in the chat, what are other things you would add to the list around assertiveness? So think of adjectives, ways that you would describe a conflict style that's healthy. I'll throw out a few more here, but I want to give you the opportunity. These three we already talked about, so I wanted to put them up. But just how would you describe a healthy conflict style? Go ahead and type it in the chat, and then Brie will just read those out as you do.
All right.
This is only going to work if you participate. So.
Yeah, Christina says that she lists choices. She would list choices. Eric says owning your feeling, not projecting. Amy says realizing that I make it important and that I need to deal with it right now and not let that person go. Keisha says, I like that approach, but a lot of my clients don't understand if I need a break or time to get back to them. There's a hard line with their boundaries. So
yeah, that'll be worth talking about for sure.
Yeah. James said a mutual understanding would fit really well in that one. Capitola said, listen. That's a good one. Yeah. And then Christina says, coming from a place of love and not judgment.
Yeah.
There's compromise from Holly. And then Sarah says, eye contact. Being willing to understand where the other person is. Clifford said, assume goodwill, conflict often, opportunity is often an opportunity. Using critical thinking, receptive body language. These are really great, you guys. Being attentive in the situation. Yeah, those were
great.
Really great.
Very good. I'll just throw out a couple more that I thought of. Solution focus. So instead of the problem being the problem, like how do we, I want to bring, when I'm bringing a problem to the table, I want to bring something in the way of a solution or a suggestion anyway that we can talk about, so that we really are, so that the person across from me isn't the problem is the problem. So then I want to focus on a solution. Kind, that assertiveness is kind. There's no, my blood may boil, I may think really strongly about something, but there's no situation that is so polarizing that in which I can't be at least kind to another person. So kind even goes beyond respectful. Kind is just having manners and continuing to use please and thank you. And so this takes a lot of discipline and kind of learned. This is what Rogers would call unconditional positive regard, where we just hold the other person in positive regard and we're kind to them, even if we strongly disagree. Vulnerable. This came up again when we talked about trust a few minutes ago. I want to bring my authentic self to the table. I may not come as a surprise to you all, but for fun, in my spare time, I help to mediate. And I used to work a lot in helping couples who are in the divorce process do mediation, parenting plans, and property divisions and so on. And what happened in those situations often is we would go along in the conversation and everyone's kind of guard was up and the two parties would be, very much sort of sniping at each other and having all the reasons why they're right and the other person is wrong. And somewhere along the line, one person would risk just talking about how the situation was affecting them, or they would do something or say something, or they would give away an emotion that was very human. And when they do that, the other person, if the other person would clue into that, all of a sudden the conversation would change. And in mediation circles, we call that the click, right? The click happened where the person saw the other as a person instead of an obstacle or the enemy or the object, and when that happened, it changed everything. So when the click happens in a conversation, and maybe you can relate to this too, we start to see each other as human beings. We start to relate to each other on a whole different level. And the problem becomes less important than our connection. So even people who have agreed that they're no longer going to live together can still, maybe around parenting or around something that's really important to both of them, have a human relationship. And so that's where vulnerability comes in. Can I, even though my defenses are up, even though I disagree with you about this, can I bring enough of my real self to the table so to where we can have human kind of interaction? So it's a little bit kind of hard to describe, but I think if you've been there and seen it, you know what I'm talking about. So you all added anything else come up for you on this list of kind of what assertiveness might mean to you before we move on to the next slide?
Yeah, if there's no empathy, trust is lost immediately in my experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how do we, so how can we both have empathy for somebody else and maybe even engender empathy from the person across from us? And you're right, there's some folks for whom they're so wounded or the walls are up so high that that it's really difficult for them to see beyond themselves. And you're right, that makes for a really difficult situation, and it's just hard for someone to sort of look over their wall to see the other. And you're right, that is really hard to build trust in that kind of dynamic. In those kinds of situations, we typically would try to find some sort of agreement on something that maybe we already agree about or whatever. So we're going to talk about how a conflict works here in a minute, kind of the stages, and maybe we'll get to that a little bit. That piece. Anything else, Bree, on that before I dive into this next piece?
Yeah, I'm not seeing anything else.
Okay. Great. Well, anyway, as always, if something strikes you, put it in the chat. We'll make sure that the group gets to hear it. So if a conflict just kind of goes on and on and on, it typically follows a pattern like this. It starts with a simple difference. So we disagree about something, we see a situation differently. Usually it's nothing major. It's about in a house, it's about my playing my music too loud, or us having different pictures of what's clean, or it could be any number of things, but there's just a simple difference of opinion or a different style, a different way of doing something. As I said before, a different way of loading the dishwasher, whether you use Drano in the toilet or not, or that's only for sinks. I mean, it's just stuff like that is just like, wow, not a big deal in and of itself. But if that goes kind of, we don't talk that through, we don't work through it, then sometimes what happens next is a misunderstanding. So we misunderstand another person's motives or motivations, and instead of it just being about the issue, it starts to become personal. So because we've missed each other, we've sort of communicated a little bit less, and you say something and I take it in a way that was maybe different than the way you intended it. We just misunderstood each other, and that misunderstanding is starting to develop the conflict into something more than just a simple difference. Then disappointment happens. So I had an expectation or a hope, and it moves again from a misunderstanding into just a genuine sense that somebody intentionally let me down, and so I'm disappointed. I had an expectation in the relationship or in a situation that kind of wasn't met. Then we have general discord, which means that it's no longer about, we're way far away from the simple difference. That was a long time ago, or a few stages ago. It's not about the issue anymore. Generally speaking, we've disappointed each other now, and there's discord. So there's just general, we just don't get along. That's the language that we would use. So two people just in general, there's just kind of mistrust. There's something needs to be rebuilt before anything good is going to happen. And then if that's left alone, it develops into kind of this last stage, which is polarization, which is really toxic. And you don't have to look very far in our world to see polarization. Look to our political climate, red and blue. So now if someone on the red side says something, no matter what it is, if you're on the blue side, you've got to disagree with what someone said on the red side. So two people are in the kind of polarization stage. one person is going to say one thing, and just because that person says it, the other person is going to take the opposite perspective. So it's not being able to see, if you've seen this, you know what I'm talking about. It's not being able to even see the good in the other person because we're so polarized. I no longer have shades of gray in my opinion about a person. They are just, frankly, to use a real frank word, they're just the enemy. And in every situation, that's where they are. So I say all this to just point out that if we can deal with something while it's a simple difference, or if I can help somebody clear up a misunderstanding, or seek some reconciliation after one person has disappointed the other person, we can actually do some apology and forgiveness here, to where we can acknowledge our wrongs and we can make them right before we get to sort of discord. That's just kind of just a way of being, and then ultimately down to polarization. It is really, really hard to come back from a situation that's polarized. And so I just, the point of all of this is to say, the sooner we can deal with a conflict between two people, or help them work it through, or even in our own situation, the sooner we can resolve things up here, the better we'll sleep at night, and the more we have the opportunity to build back a relationship. Once we start to get down into these areas of discord and polarization, really, it's really, really difficult to come back from there. So that's kind of the anatomy of a conflict when it sort of is left unchecked. Any comments, thoughts about that before we move on? All right, as always, feel free to pitch in along the way. So this is just another way to kind of illustrate what we've been talking about all along. So we start off in almost every relationship with what we call pseudotrust. Pseudotrust is it's false. It's not fake. It's not intentionally deceptive or anything, but it's like we give each other the benefit of the doubt, right? So when Brianna and I first met years ago, we didn't think much about each other. We thought we didn't know anything about each other. We didn't have mistrust. We just thought, oh, okay, we give each other the benefit of the doubt. Seems like a nice person, good enough. And we so we're respectful, we're kind, all of that. But then along the way, there's something that we might disagree about. Just we see the world differently in some respect. And whatever that thing is leads us, both of us, to a choice. And then the choice, and again, it doesn't have to be a big thing. It's often a simple disagreement or just a different way of seeing things. But we have a choice. So one option is to avoid, just to say, hey, we're gonna, and in avoidance, maybe it's just letting the other person win, and not doing anything about the conflict. And if it's a thing that really matters to one or both of us, by avoiding it, then we really are either sort of back to pseudo-trust, which means we just are going to fake it and just pretend that thing doesn't exist and keep avoiding it, or the relationship is eventually just going to end. We're just going to say, well, that's just not a person with whom I can relate. This happens far too often. This is where we just unfriend somebody on Facebook because we just don't want to deal with them anymore. And in some situations, maybe that's a wise choice, and maybe that's enough because we don't have to interact with that person. But what we miss out on when we do that is we miss out on the opportunity to deepen, to have a relationship with somebody with a different perspective than our own, and actually work through something and grow as a result, right? Another option then is to fight to win, right? Or to bully our way through the situation. So being more aggressive than passive, and the point here is to, again, that little voice inside of our head is saying, hey, I got to get control. I got to win in order to feel okay, or to feel safe even. And again, those two, it sort of leads us to the same place. If you are a passive person, and an aggressive person is in conflict with you, the likely outcome is you're going to choose to lose, they're going to choose to win. And one dynamic that happens in that particular pairing is that you ask the passive person, or you ask the aggressive person what that relationship is like, and they'll say, oh, it's fine, we're good. Well, of course we're good, right? Because you got what you wanted, but you ask the person who lost intentionally, And they say, oh no, I just don't go there with that person. So they basically said, hey, I don't connect with that person anymore. The aggressive person may or may not be in touch with that dynamic at all, because they're so used to kind of rolling over people and getting what they want that they may not even be attuned to that dynamic. So I talked to a couple once who was really struggling with this. They had this kind of life or relationship long pattern of doing life this way. And the aggressive one, said, well, what do I do to fix it? I know I've run over my partner all this time. And what we agreed to, the three of us, was you need to give your partner space to say what she thinks and to make decisions. And you need to back way off and find out what she thinks about things, because you haven't really seemed to care about that for all of these years. And so they made some progress on that, but it's still a really hard pattern to break, because then the aggressive person feels like the passive person should do that naturally, but they don't do that naturally. So it becomes a really difficult pattern to kind of interrupt. And this couple actually ended up divorcing ultimately. They just couldn't get to the place to kind of bring that back. That pattern was so well, just kind of ingrained in their story. So again, you can either go back to faking it if you do that, and everyone just seems like everything's fine, but what's really happening is some level of avoidance, or the relationship deteriorates and ends. The other option is to do what I call I don't know if you noticed at the beginning of the presentation, we call this fighting for trust, which means largely it's an internal fight. So those voices that are inside of me that are telling me what to do, either to seek comfort or to win or to disengage so that I get to have control, or whatever kind of version of those stories are going on in my head, if I can fight those and I can say, nope, I've got to do something that's difficult for me. I've got to be respectful, or I've got to be honest, or I've got to stay engaged, whatever those things are. I've got to be kind to this person because that's going to help here. Whatever those messages are, that's an internal kind of fight. And then that ultimately translates into the external fight being one that is actually has a very different flavor to it than it would if I didn't do that internal work. And of course, then if we do that, and people and parties are willing to actually walk through it and get to a better place, then what we end up is not pseudo-trust, but real trust that can grow, and we can teach each other how to do that. Question always comes up here is, well, what happens if only one person's willing to do that work and the other person is just stuck in their conflict style and they're just not going to come out of it? And the answer is, well, probably limited success. In that all I can do is invite you into that and hope that you'll take my invitation, and that you'll enter into this with me, and we'll do this together, and you'll overcome your discomfort just like I'm trying to overcome mine, and we'll come to a place where we can actually walk through this. But that doesn't always happen, and it does take two people to kind of resolve something. But as in the recovery world, we hear a lot the language around owning your side of the street and cleaning up your side of the street. So even if the other person doesn't accept my invitation, I'll sleep better at night if I have done what I know to be the right thing. I've extended the invitation. I've tried to make to right a wrong, or to make a situation right. And so this is just this isn't rocket science, a little diagram, but just trying another way to kind of illustrate what we've talked about so far. I'll leave a pause here in case anyone has any comments or thoughts just about. This is, again, pretty simplified version of kind of what it looks like in real life, but just trying to get to what this kind of how this goes.
Yeah, Alan, I've seen some pretty good questions in here while you're talking.
Okay.
Let me go up one sec. So what is your advice on having a disrespectful coworker who seems to only care about themselves? Do you have any suggestions for dealing with someone like this?
Yeah, invite them in. So how do you do that? So how I don't think there's a slide on here, but I want to interject Offner into this. Bree and I have talked about Offner before. Offner is a little tool we used at New Earth Recovery. It's a strategy for having a crucial conversation with somebody, and it's OFNR. So it starts with observation. So I go to that person and I say, Bree, I'm going to pick on you again.
Yeah.
Bree, I notice that when we're in conversations, you tend to dominate them all the time, and it's hard for the rest of the people in the room to have a say. So that's my observation. The feeling, when that happens, so F is the feeling. When that happens, it causes me to shut down because I'm intimidated by you, and I'm afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing. I'm afraid I'm going to make you angry. So I feel really, really intimidated, and it just really I clam up. I don't say anything. I have a need in a meeting to say some things. So the N is need. I need to be able to say some things, and I need to be respected in order to do my job. And I need you to be able to ask me what's going on, or what I think about something before you move ahead with this, with your idea. And so that's a need I have. So here's my request. My request, and that's the R. And my request of you is that you would, in a meeting, before a decision is made, that you would ask everyone around the circle what they think, or give a larger pause when you're asking people what they think, so that we could maybe all chip in and say something. So that's a super specific kind of example, but WAQRR is a great tool to say, okay, I'm going to give an observation, which is just, here's the way I see it. It's just my perspective. It might be limited. Here's the feeling that it causes in me. So I'm owning my feeling around the situation. Here's a need that I have that I'm going to bring to the table. This is the vulnerability part of it, to say, I have the need to be respected. I have the need to be able to speak my mind, or I have the need to whatever that is. Okay, I have the need for quiet at night, whatever that is. And then a request, and a request is something that somebody can say no to. So my request is simply, here's what I'm asking of you. Would you be willing to do this? The answer may be, no, I can't do that, but I could do this. Could we do that? So it's kind of a negotiation strategy, so that people can say no to. It's a request. It's open-ended, and it could be turned down, but it puts something really concrete on the table in the way of a solution that someone can respond to. So if there's a really long answer to your short question, but WAQRR is a great tool that might be helpful in work setting. Is certainly helpful in our home settings. We have actually a form that's the WAQRR form that reminds people of the format. Okay, other questions? I'll leave this quote on the board here while we're talking. But what's another one?
I've seen another really good one from Bailey. So I work as a peer support specialist in a homeless shelter, and we often have to use de-escalation tactics to solve conflict, because most of the population that we work with unfortunately has a lot of trauma due to unsafe environments. People here usually jump from simple differences straight to discord and polarization. When I'm speaking with someone after a conflict has happened, how can I encourage conflict styles other than aggression? It kind of relates to the limbic brain a little bit.
Hello.
Yeah, that's
Hello.
great. So how do we do that? I think it's there's so many ways to answer that. I think it's through reflection and asking them about. So in a mediation setting, we would ask them how, what their feelings are around how the conflict went. How did that go? Does that happen a lot for you? My observation, are you interested in some feedback on how that went from my perspective? So when I'm going to give feedback, I always want to ask somebody if they're open to the feedback that I have. And so then I might say, well, so my feedback is you seem to go right from a disagreement straight to real deal, anger and kind of writing off this person. Do you think there might be another response that could be helpful for you to use, or have you ever tried something different that's worked, that's had a different result than what we just saw? So trying to sort of, through questions, getting them to do a little analysis if they're open. Timing is everything. You don't do it right when they're the hottest, right? You wait for it to cool down, and then ask them maybe at that moment, boy, could we talk about what happened this afternoon? Would you be willing to talk to me about that? And just get them to reflect a little bit on their own situation and maybe what they were going through at the time, and maybe trying to expand their what we call their response repertoire, right? To say, well, what would it have been like to try something different there? Or is there anything else you could have done that might have gotten a better result? Something like that. So a little debrief time might be helpful. And I know that sounds really easy to do right here, but I also know in the heat of something on the ground, you've got to adapt those kinds of things to the setting and try to make them work. But.
And then there's one other one from Dawn. Any advice on how to deal with narcissistic behaviors?
Yeah. I have some of that from time to time in my work context, and again, the whole thing with narcissism, in case that you're unfamiliar with the term, is just an overly kind of self-centered way of seeing the world, which is just everything is about me, 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 me. So trying to some of that is literally clinical. I mean, there's some some real disorder there for some folks. It's just really kind of a high narcissistic thing. Part of that is just super protective for some people that again, because of their past experiences, there's so much wounding there that they just all about being able to protect themselves. So anyway, so trying to get at those kind of root emotions, like what's underneath that, what's if you can get to know a person to the level where they're able to talk about what are you seems like you might be afraid of something happening right now. What's that about? Or have you ever put yourself in someone else's shoes to get a sense of what they might be going through? Or do you have any thoughts about what so-and-so might be thinking right now? Just to sort of help them even practice that, which for some people, it would be a brand new experience, and so again, may or may not have a lot of effect. What we do in our work often is a lot of seed planting. You may not get to see what comes out the other end, but to at least plant some of those questions to try to help people move to the next level of development in any of those areas could be helpful.
Yeah, I think that's all I see right now. Okay.
So this quote, you've had a chance to sort of reflect on it a minute. We are wired not to change our mind. The way we think has kept us safe this far. Thank you very much. So there's really no need to change it. This is what kind of our lizard brain is telling us, right? That no need to change, everything's working fine. Thank you very much. So when someone approaches me with a new idea or a new way of looking at something, my first reaction is not, well, boy, that might be right. I should figure out a way to really accommodate that new way of looking at things into my life. No, my first reaction is almost always to sort of put up the defense and think of 5 reasons why that person's wrong and I'm right. So there's just some wisdom here to kind of think about. Is there a way that we could try to have more porous walls where, yes, those things have kept us safe. That way of looking at something has worked. But is there a way to say, wow, there's another person's perspective that that might be worth taking in, and can I still be safe and be open to what someone else has to say? So I want to I'm mindful of the time here. I want to give time for more conversation at the end, but I want to just give you some thoughts. These are what I call fair fighting rules, or just things to think about. I put this could prime the pump for a set of agreements. So in a residential setting or a group setting or maybe even a work setting where there's a group of people who are working or living together, can be really amazing experience for them to come up with a set of agreements about how they're going to treat each other, especially around conflict. So this is just a list over the years that I've developed with the help of with groups that I've worked with. And there's nothing magic about this list. It's not complete. It may not even be worded perfectly, but just to kind of prime the pump. So what are some ways, some things, if for nothing else, even if you don't use this in a group kind of activity, are these things that you could keep in your own mind while you're doing conflicts or having important conversations with people? You know what, before I come up with my list, I want to hear your list of rules. So just fair fighting rules. If you were to just come up with some rules, some guidelines that you want to keep in mind as you're having, you came up with a few of these earlier when we were talking about assertiveness, but anything you would kind of put on that list first and foremost. Let's just get a few of those out to kind of soften the ground, and then I'll throw out my thoughts.
Amy says, be respectful.
Yeah, right.
Eric says, no labeling or name calling. Chris says, no interrupting, allow people to finish their train of thought.
Mm-hmm. So good. Those are all on my list. You all got the right answers. Good job. All right.
James says use logic.
Okay. Yeah, logic. Sometimes that works. Not always, but because some of this is so emotional, but so no name calling, yelling, or interrupting is just so important that this is just a part of respecting people. We can be really sophisticated, by the way, about name calling. So it's not just you jerk or whatever, fill in your derogatory statement here, but we can be really subtle about how we do name calling. So just being aware of that. One person speaks at a time. So this is about not interrupting. Being right isn't always the most important thing. I've been married 30 years and I've learned this, that I may believe I'm right. I may or may not be, but that belief can really get in the way of something more important, which is how we relate to each other, right? And this is an important point to make, that in our conflicts, what if we had two goals? One of them would be maybe to win or to get our point across, or to be sure that we kind of hold our ground in whatever the argument or conversation is. But what if the other goal was to deepen our trust with each other? So I have two goals in this. I'm going to enter into this. I'm going to try to get my way, or I'm going to try to really protect somebody else, or whatever my goal is, to better the world, right? But my other goal is to deepen my level of trust in relationship with the person with whom I'm in this conversation. How would my conversations be different if that was a primary goal of my interaction? A year from now, I'm probably not going to remember who won the fight, but I will probably remember how our relationship was affected by the fight. And so that's really an important thing to keep in mind. So being right isn't always the most important thing. I statements instead of you. This is pretty basic stuff. This is where Offner comes in, where I'm going to own my own emotions. I'm going to own my own stuff, and hopefully model the way for you to do the same. But I'm not going to talk about you. I'm going to make an observation about behavior, but I'm not going to blame, right? Get support instead of picking teams. This is really important. I could talk for a long time about this one, but when we're in a conflict with somebody, we have this natural need to be supported, and our natural thing that we might do intentionally or otherwise is to pick people for our side. So two people are in a conflict and they go out and they pick other people to be against the other person. This is really disruptive in a housing environment, a group environment of any kind, a work environment. So instead of doing that, what I really want to do is I want to go get the support I need. I need someone to tell me, hey, no, your perspective is valid. That makes sense. But a good support person is also going to say, boy, you should go back and really try to work that out with so-and-so. Or how can I help you do that? Or do you need me to be a part of the conversation so the two of you can work this out, right? So I get support that I need. I get someone that can help me feel like I'm not, out there, but that also is helping me kind of actually really work out. So you all know that we have different kinds of friends. We have friends that are like that I talked about, that'll really help us do this. We also have friends that will be more than happy to kind of up talk it because they like the drama. And so we don't want to go to our drama people that are going to make things worse and kind of build a bigger kind of brouhaha around the situation, but we want to go to the people who are really going to help us kind of de-escalate and down talk and get to a better place. So get support instead of picking teams. Avoid conflict over email or text. I would say avoid conflict over email or text. Really important. If it's starting to become a crucial conversation, one that's important, it feels really good to type all that out with your thumbs. But I'll tell you, it's so kind of one-dimensional that you really miss the vital importance of being able to have the fuller conversation. You may, in order to prepare for an important conversation, write some bullet points down for yourself to be sure that you've said everything that you come to say, especially if you're a little bit more on the passive side and you need some structure and you need to not forget something in the moment. You can bring those with you, but just strongly encourage you to not use those kind of one-dimensional media to talk about things that are really, really important with other people. Avoid the words always, never, and but. So always and never just really are inflammatory in conversations. you always make a mess and you never clean it up and you never take my side and you blah blah blah. So then the conversation almost always devolves into an argument about whether that's true or not. In every situation has this been the case. And so it's just those are just words to avoid. And but same kind of thing, almost always when you say you're a really nice person, but anything that happens after the but is usually not going to be helpful to the conversation. So just there are other ways to kind of express our concerns and feelings. And then avoid assigning motives to other people. So I want to, instead of saying, I know you're angry at me, or I know you did that because you ... Assigning a motive is really inflammatory to people. It just kind of gets them wound up. And so if I can ask you about your motive, so, boy, you seem really angry right now. Can you tell me what's going on? Or have I done something that has offended you? Or do we need to talk about something? Or what's going on with you right now? Opens up the conversation, and it doesn't kind of lead people to feel like, no one wants to be interpreted by somebody with whom they're in a conflict. So anything that either I'm missing or anything that you want to ask about or talk about on that list?
Yeah, there's a couple other
Great.
things they wanted to add to the list. So challenge ideas, not people, Nathan says. Sarah says, allow time for others to respond. Introverts internalize and need time to figure out how to phrase their contributions.
Yeah. Really good.
Yeah. And then Chris says, express yourself, but allow time for others to speak. Don't hog the spotlight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to have on the list something that Stephen Covey says, which is seek first to understand and then to be understood.
Mhm.
So it's that whole thing about listening first, rather than feeling like we've got to be heard all the time. So really paying attention to what the other person's trying to say.
Mhm. And then I see one from Anne, she said, recognizing strengths and mutual goals, validate as opportune. And then she was agreeing with Chris on supporting various communication styles. And she agrees that introverts sometimes engaging is like a double dutch. And then Chris says, as a person who avoids conflict, I find that bringing a written/typed list of things I want to discuss helps me keep it focused and less emotional.
Great. Yeah. And by the way, I'm not, I want to be careful about being less emotional. I think it's okay to show emotion. I think if emotion takes over a situation, that's hard. Or if everything is kind of inflammatory and you're wanting to really stick to make the issue instead of the other person, that makes a lot of sense. That's really good.
Yeah. And then,
right. Go ahead.
Oh, just a couple more. Everyone's typing away. Stephen says, remember that everyone views each situation differently. Each person has thought processes that differs from what your thought processes may be.
Yeah.
And Eric says, avoid make statements that behavior makes me mad. Use instead, I am mad when this happens.
Mm-hmm.
And then Anne says, platinum rule, treat others how they want to be treated.
Yeah. The golden rule is treat others as you would want to be treated. The platinum rule is treat them how they want to be treated, which is the next level. It's really good.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I want to talk about, I just can't do this talk without talking about apology and forgiveness for a minute. This is its own talk, which could go really, really long, but I have just a couple things I want to throw out here. First of all, I don't think we apologize enough. And I think maybe it's pride, or it's a sense of maybe being too vulnerable or losing, or just the desire not to lose, or something that keeps us from sometimes owning our part in something. And so there are ways to apologize that are sincere and meaningful without having to be dishonest. It's okay to say, boy, I didn't intend for that to be hurtful, and but it seems to have hurt you, and for that I'm really sorry. And a good apology is not, I'm sorry you feel that way. That's not an apology. I don't know what that is exactly, but that's sort of pointing out somebody else's situation. I mean, you can say that, and that could have another purpose, but that is not an apology. But apology is actually owning my part of something. An apology can be really thorough, and it's probably in some situations, especially if it's a repeated offense, it's helpful to own it and be sure that the person knows that you know what you're apologizing for. So it's not just I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. It's I'm sorry, I know I've been late twice this week, and I know that that's disrespectful to you, especially if you've cooked or fill in the blanks, whatever that is. But I want you to know that I feel like I've wronged you, and I'm going to work really hard to be sure that that doesn't happen again. So that's a more full apology. It's not blank, and then I need to back it up with action to do something different and kind of do a living amends after that. So blank apology isn't particularly helpful, but one that's full like that is. Forgiveness, again, this could be an hour talk. Forgiveness, I'll say a couple things. Forgiveness helps us sleep at night. So there's nowhere that I know of that says that forgiveness requires an apology, meaning I don't need to hear someone apologize to me before I can forgive them. And some of that work happens internally. It's not, I don't need to express sometimes it can do harm to say, well, Bree, I forgive you for that awful thing you said to me the other day. That's not really the kind of forgiveness we're talking about. That's kind of just kind of calling her out, right? And trying to make myself look good. Forgiveness might be just something that I do kind of internally to say, hey, I'm letting her off the hook for that. And I need my attitude toward her to change. And I'm just going to release her of that debt, whatever that is that she owes me. So that we can move on. And sometimes the apology will happen. Sometimes I need to do that forgiveness work over and over and over and over again. Internally, I may never have the opportunity to say it out loud, but it's vitally important to my own health and ultimately the health of the relationship, potentially. But forgiveness isn't necessarily the same thing as reconciliation. Not all relationships can be reconciled, but all of them can have an element of forgiveness in them. Even if the other person isn't well, or there's some reason why it wouldn't be safe for me to be back in relationship, I can do the forgiveness work for my own sake, at least to be able to say, hey, I've got to drop this backpack full of rocks that I'm carrying around against this other person. So a lot more to be said about that for sure, but I didn't want a topic about conflict to end without being able to at least say, hey, we need to apologize and we need to forgive freely so that we can, bring closure to conflicts and be able to use them as sort of catapults into healthier relationship as opposed to something that could be really toxic and just keep living on and on and on and on. All right, comments about that, or I'm going to just open it up to just general comments, questions. Got a couple more minutes and then we'll wrap it up. So just last thoughts.
I'm not seeing anything yet, but I see a raised hand. I have to find them.
It's me.
Okay, hi. Sorry, Bailey.
Hi guys. I just wanted to say thank you so much for this presentation. I really was, I just came into this peer support position, and I feel like I have been given a really great opportunity to be able to talk to our patrons here at the shelter about what maybe could have been done better. Rather than just trying to solve the conflict very quickly in order to maintain the safety of our shelter. So this has been really, really helpful, and also helpful in my own life because I am not a very confrontational person, but OFNR, I feel like that's going to be very helpful in my own life, especially with talking to my supervisors and my coworkers. So I just wanted to say thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm glad it's helpful.
Yeah, Nathan says, wonderful presentation. Thank you so much, Alan. And Christina says, thank you, everyone.
All right. Well, with that, I'm thankful to you all. Thanks for your great input along the way. This could be expanded so much with all of the comments that you brought to the table, and there's obviously a lot of collective wisdom in this group about that you all have learned from experience, no doubt. And so really thankful for your participation. There's my email address if you need to get in touch with me ever. But Bree, I'll turn it back over to you. I think you've got maybe another announcement or two about upcoming things for
Yeah.
WAQRR.
Yeah, so WAQRR, we host these webinars monthly. And so I just wanted to let you guys know, if you don't know already, just some of the events that are coming up. So in March, we are March 11th and 12th, we're doing a mental health first aid. And this is a 2-day training, and it has even like an hour or two of pre-work that we send out before the actual virtual training. And so, yeah, it's a pretty in-depth training, but spots are limited, but I think we still have some openings. And again, all these events will be on WAQRR.org under the events page. And then after that, we have diversity, which is train the trainer, shapes. So if you guys went to that shapes presentation a month back, this one's a more in-depth one. That's March 17th from 10 to 2, and then on the 24th of March from 10 to 11:30, we have peer counseling in Washington State. So this is a great one. If you know anybody who's interested in doing peer counseling, or you're wanting to know more about it, or perhaps residents, this is a great one to go to as well. Yeah, and with that, just thank you all for joining us today. And yeah, check out those events on our webpage.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.